Belfast, 15 for London, so a relatively mild or in some places warm night to come. And then another fine start to the day tomorrow with plenty of sunshine for England and Wales. I think one or two showers could just about move into parts of England, especially over the Pennines, and they'll be more widespread for Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. In between, still some sunshine, high teens I think widely in the northern half of the UK. Sunshine remains in the south with 25 to 28 Celsius. Into Thursday evening, the showers in the north eventually die away, and then widely clearing skies. And really the trend into the weekend is for high pressure to develop widely across the UK. That will lead to widespread sunshine and dry weather, and it will turn increasingly hot, temperatures approaching the mid-30s later.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome to On the Money. I'm Mark Longhurst, standing in today for Liam, and for the next hour we'll be trying to make sense of the latest snapshot on the state of the British economy, the GDP or growth figures, and talking about how those may affect all those promises being made by the Tory party leadership hopefuls. Now, joining us, two veterans, I'm sure they won't mind me saying that, of previous financial and political crises, Justin Urquhart-Stewart and John Longworth. Both friends, of course, of On the Money. They'll be assessing the state of UK PLC. And, as ever, a whole host of subjects with those people who really know their stuff. But first, all the GB News headlines with Rosie.
A very good afternoon to you. It's just gone 1 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Now, Boris Johnson has defended his record in office, saying he'll leave Downing Street with his head held high. It's the first Prime Minister's question since his resignation. Well, Mr Johnson was accused of leaving behind a broken economy. The Prime Minister said he believed his team in government had done a remarkable job in helping the country through difficult times. But the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, questioned the former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak's credibility in dealing with the economy. Well, Rishi Sunak is one of many Tory leadership candidates that have been vying for support for fellow MPs ahead of the first ballot later today. The Trade Secretary, Penny Mordaunt, has launched her campaign saying she'd return to traditional Conservative values and fix what she called a broken Whitehall machine. Tom Tugendhat has pledged to increase defence spending. 8 Conservatives are still in the running to be leader of the party. The remaining candidates have to hit a threshold of 30 votes of support today to stay in the race. The results will be announced at 5 p.m.
This is a thoughtful approach which will actually work. And that's the key point. Will it work? If we are running an economic policy that's working at the next general election, we'll win. If we're running one which is made up of populist nonsense, we'll lose.
That was David Davis speaking there. Now, the UK economy grew by 0.5% in May, following a 0.2% drop in April. Analysts had expected that figure to remain flat. Well, the Office for National Statistics says the growth came after a bounce back across all services, manufacturing and construction, with a notable increase in demand for health services and holidays. Well, economics commentator Laurie Laird told GB News that a recession isn't likely.
So there was one anomaly, which is our going to the GP more often, that kept us in the black this month around. But because May was so strong, it looks like we will probably not contract in the second quarter. So it means that this talk of recession is still some way off.
The president of Sri Lanka has temporarily authorised the country's prime minister to carry out presidential duties. It's amid ongoing protests in the country caused by anger over inflation and widespread fuel and medicine shortages. The premier's fled to the Maldives hours before he was due to resign. He's insisted he still intends to step down. Twitter is suing Elon Musk for breaking a £37 billion deal to buy the social media platform. Twitter's asking the US court to order the Tesla owner to complete the merger at the agreed share price. Last week, Musk said he was terminating the deal because Twitter failed to provide information regarding how many fake accounts were on the platform. New CCTV footage has been released showing the events of the shooting that took place in an elementary school in Texas in May. The video shows the police stopping to use hand sanitizer as 18-year-old gunman Salvador Ramos entered the school in Uvalde carrying a rifle. 19 children and 2 teachers were killed in the latest in a string of mass shootings across the US. 4 men have been arrested in a National Crime Agency operation targeting migrant smuggling to the UK. A man was arrested in Dagenham on suspicion of facilitation offences, as well as 3 further men in Ilford, Streatham and Leytonstone. The arrests are linked to 2 separate events in 2019, where a total of 32 migrants were found in the back of HGVs in the Netherlands and France. An amber warning for extreme heat has been issued for this Sunday and next Monday. The Met Office are warning of potentially exceptionally high temperatures that could impact infrastructure and travel. They also say and warn of adverse health effects leading to potential serious illness or danger to life, and say these warnings are not limited to those most vulnerable to extreme heat. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to On the Money.
Rosie, thanks very much indeed. And hello and welcome to today's On the Money. I'm Mark Longhurst and I'm sitting in for Liam in the GB News hot seat. Indeed, how hot can it get today? Not just talking about the mercury as it rises in our thermometers towards perhaps 40 Celsius. We're told a new record perhaps in the coming days of the weekend. But how about all that fevered activity behind the scenes today as those 8 Tory party hopefuls, as they are now, jostle for position to make it through to the next round. So some sweaty brows, heated exchanges with journalists and a burning ambition to be the next party leader and, of course, eventually Prime Minister. Well, we're getting the latest from our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's down at Westminster on those runners and riders, and who may fall next in this grand national political and economic stakes. Indeed, is tax still the hurdle that could trip them up, whether it's Rishi's fiscal prudence, we haven't heard from her since the days of Margaret Thatcher, of course, or what was described by Lord Lawson as the other candidates engaging in a Dutch auction to go lower on taxes. And talking of going lower or higher, what will they all make of today's GDP figures? Up 0.5% for May, confounding indeed the critics in the latest snapshot on the state of UK PLC and, of course, its prospects for avoiding recession. Because remember, without a growing economy, those politicians aren't going to be able to afford to do very much. Indeed, it was only last month the OECD cut its growth forecast for the UK in 2023 next year to 0. That's the lowest in the G20, and you can't go much lower than that. Or can you? Are circumstances still pointing to a return to a previous ice age? 1970s Britain, when something called stagflation stalked the streets of Britain, a stagnant economy, but still being hammered by the ravages of rising inflation. And from Westminster to Reading, we're crossing over to our regional reporter, disclosing just how everyone's coping in their increasingly hot work environments. Yes, as we say, UK temperatures set perhaps to soar to record highs in the coming days. Is there any relief for people around the water cooler? And of course, each day On the Money features an in-depth Money Talks interview. Well, today we're hearing from Edward Chancellor, a great name for a well-known financial historian, author, journalist and investment strategist. Now, he's highly critical of global central banks, arguing that it's their policies, indeed, that have unleashed all this inflation and bringing the world to the brink of another financial crisis. That'll be coming up later in the show. And, of course, remember to email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet @gbnews. And don't forget, of course, to subscribe to our YouTube channel to get the latest. And we're reading out, of course, all your reactions shortly. Stay tuned to find out what everyone is talking about today. You're watching GB News. I'm Mark Longhurst, and you're on the money. Well, joining us now to assess where we are and perhaps more importantly where we might be going, John Longworth, former director of the British Chambers of Commerce, now chair indeed of the Independent Business Network, and Justin Urquhart-Stewart, still proudly wearing those badges of honour, the famous red braces showing that he made it through that ice age, the 1970s and the 1980s. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
I hope you don't mind me calling you veterans, because it is important to put everything that's happening.
Well, particularly with inflation and things like that.
Yeah,
we're actually remembering back to the 1970s and just how dangerous that was.
And this is what really is spooking not just the politicians but the economists. And we use that phrase stagflation, i.e. there's no growth, it's stagnant, and yet we've got the inflation. That may be not quite as dangerous as we think, because today's figures show there was, 0.5% increase in growth for May.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the inflation situation, many of the economists that advise the Independent Business Network, for example, believe that it will actually come back down again to around about 5% next year.
Next year, yeah.
Provided, of course, we don't adopt the policies that Rishi Sunak are proposing, providing that we actually don't increase taxes. So 5%, because it's a supply-side problem, it's actually a global issue following the pandemic that's causing the inflation. Of course, it has been stimulated by banks printing money as well.
Right. And indeed, just on the latest figures today, when you talk about supply side, i.e. the stuff coming through the system, we're being told nickel, cobalt, aluminium, steel, paper, fish, cooking oil, all up. Yeah. And this is what is going to come down the system for the months to come, maybe into even next year, pushing that inflation up.
But there will be, certainly the Ukrainian issue will carry into next year, because they haven't been able to do the crops, to get out there and actually sow them, let alone actually reap them, let alone actually get them out of the country.
It's one of the world's food baskets.
Exactly. So that situation means there's going to be more inflation coming through. But the good news is, remember, inflation's calculated monthly. So what went up by 50% or 100% last year, there will be a month this year where that drops off the calculation. So it will start coming down again. But I agree with John, it'd be around about 5%, not going back to where we were before, which was much, much lower.
Right. But we've got this heady mix of politics being involved. And one of the main political issues we've heard on these hustings is tax, what you do with tax and when. It seems to be at the moment Rishi versus the rest. But it's interesting that he's recalled Margaret Thatcher, spoken of fiscal conservatism and prudence. We haven't heard from her for a long time, have we?
But you know, this is not the era of Margaret Thatcher. It's not 1979. Of course, Rishi's policies could create the 1970s problems, but as it stands at the moment, it's more like post-World War, because we're coming out of a pandemic situation.
So emergency measures?
Emergency measures have been in place. There are supply-end problems, as has just been said. Banks have printed money. That's caused inflation. Of course, the government itself has caused a lot of the problems of the cost of living so far by having a mad approach to net zero. they've chosen the most expensive route to net zero.
Or the green levies.
Which has created energy price increases. All the increases in energy prices that have occurred so far have nothing to do with the Ukraine. They're entirely to do with the government's net zero policy.
But, Justin, will there be those in business actually looking at what Rishi Sunak, who was the Chancellor, let's not forget, until fairly recently, saying, well, yes, he's actually being sensible in that he wants to choke off inflation before perhaps we look at those tax rises. But others are saying, well, no, actually, we need perhaps tax cuts first to actually stimulate the economy and get it.
Everyone's talking about lower in terms of category. It's you grow the economy. What do you have to do to get if you get the economy growing, you have more money flowing through the system, more chance actually then having more money to earn some tax revenue out of. If you're trying to do anything other way by focusing just on inflation, no, get the growth back in. And the growth is dependent on one word, confidence. We need leaders that give us the confidence. So it's not just consumer spending, because the consumer, remember, is the majority of the UK expenditure, but also companies spending and, of course, inward investment.
And given that, isn't everyone going to be sitting on their hands at the moment to see what emerges from Westminster? What is the new government going to look like? Who is going to be the new Prime Minister?
Well, certainly for the next few weeks, there'll be a lot of sitting on hands. Of course, the naysayers, the people who've actually talked Britain down, have been saying for a long time that the UK, post-Brexit, will perform very badly. Actually, we've outgrown the European Union every single year since 2016. And look, once again, it's been confounded. We've actually got GDP.
Well, exactly, yeah. I mean, how has this come about? Because we're being told it's in manufacturing, it's in construction, all those areas that we thought maybe would be flatlining. A lot of economists saying, well, perhaps 0.1% increase for May. 0.5% is substantial.
And if we strip out the reversal of the production of things like test kits for COVID, it's actually more like 0.8% growth. This is really good stuff. But we can do so much better. We can never save your way to prosperity. You can only trade your way to prosperity.
Yeah.
And the obvious answer for increasing productivity in the UK is cut taxes, cut bureaucracy, cut the state, cut all those things that hold us back.
But should those tax cuts be targeted? Because certainly when you speak to some economists, Gerard Lyons was saying, yes, cut VAT on fuel perhaps to make fuel cheaper to get goods delivered and so on, and maybe corporation tax to a certain degree, but not across the board.
No, if doing something like VAT, that really isn't, it's going to be very expensive if you start doing that. But of course, actually, who's benefiting? Well, those who are spending most, who would tend to be wealthier people. You actually want to focus on those who are in most danger in this in the next 12 months, because they will be suffering. This is going to be a very painful winter for them. We have to regard this as being, there are emergency measures that needed to be taken, and therefore focus on where you need that help to come in.
OK, I'm going to make you the new Chancellor. What would you do first to maybe get emergency measures, as we've talked about, in place? I mean, remember Alistair Darling, for instance, reduced that rate of VAT.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't necessarily, don't do the VAT bit. Do actually where you've actually got people getting benefit coming through. Those are the ones that are actually going to be under greatest pressure. And you know full well they're going to be spending that money. So if you worry about people spending, people are going to spend. They're not going to stop. What you don't want to do is actually slowing the economy by finding that people at the poorest end can't afford to do anything. That's when you'll start finding then the economy starts slowing up. A target in that direction, you'll have more bang for your buck.
OK. But, John, even if I make you the new Chancellor, you've got something called the Bank of England, still independent, unlikely perhaps to push further and harder to get inflation choked off.
Well, we should cut corporation tax. We should cut the basic rate
to what sort of, back to 19%?
15%.
15?
Within the term of Parliament. Wow. Definitely. And actually eliminate it in the end because it's paid by British businesses.
Yeah, just to remind people, this is a tax, if you like, on company profits.
It's a tax on jobs, in essence. Because of that, the fact of the matter is it's paid by British businesses. It's not paid by multinationals who avoid it. Cut the basic rate of income tax and actually cut fuel duty, because that's the thing that's crippling people at the moment. And get rid of the green levies. And or if we get those things going, it will really help stimulate the economy.
Right, OK. Well, let's talk about doing that. We've only got, we're told, headroom in the economy of about 30 billion. Taking all that tax out of the system, there's going to be a bit of a black hole. Where do you make the money up? Is it going to be borrowing, or do you start to cut services back?
Both. We've got to do both. Cut the size of the state. We've got 20% more civil servants now than we had in 2016. You know, what are they all doing, apart from working from home? people are saying that you can do in 4 days what we did in 5. Well, in that case, we don't need 20% of the people. And there's a labour shortage in the private sector.
Yes. I mean, we've still got very high employment but in historical terms, especially looking back to the 1970s. But what about borrowing? It is still relatively cheaper when we look back to the 1970s and 1980s. Could a government still borrow and not get into a debt crisis?
This is where you have to be careful, because you look back 2 years ago, we were paying around about 50 billion a year on interest on our debt. And here I think that the government debt finance operation down in Croydon, who actually managed our debt, they've done it pretty well. But unfortunately, what's happened, we've got a lot of index-linked stuff there, and index-link, of course, applies to them. Remember that one of the largest owner of British debt is the British government. No, this is the joy of quantitative easing.
Never mind worrying about your mortgage. The government's thinking about a lot of money it owes.
But the amount of interest they're now paying is over 80 billion. Remember, our defence budget expenditure is 50 billion. So we've got to be very careful before you start doing that. So find other ways of investing. There is no shortage of money in Britain. What you need to do is actually find better ways of getting people to invest into...
So what, investment tax breaks? Because that's started to be mooted by one or two.
It must be to encourage more money to go into business and directly into, one of the things I've always banged on about is regional businesses. You know, because they don't come via London, because otherwise you're going to pay all the London costs and charges of accountants.
Wasn't there something called levelling up?
Exactly.
Whatever happened to that?
You know, and you go to the North East and people will be interested about it. There's lots of money there, but someone took the plumbing away, whereby you used to be able to invest in local businesses. Yeah. I'm not saying local stock exchanges are silly gets in red braces, we've got enough of them. What you want to be able to have is regional mechanisms for investment in those businesses and the infrastructure to back it up. And that's not a railway.
That's the wisdom red braces bring you. Gentlemen, thank you for all that expertise. You're watching On the Money with me, Mark Longhurst, today, sitting in for Liam, of course. Now, after the break, hearing from our political editor, yes, those first ballots in the race to the Tory leadership, well, 12 minutes and counting. 8 candidates, remember, are confirmed. Stay with us for the latest here on The Money.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Well, welcome back to On the Money with me, Mark Longhurst, today sitting in for Liam. Now, let's remind you that the Tory leadership hopefuls battling, and they will be in 9 minutes' time, to be those to secure as many MPs' votes as possible in the contest to become the party's next leader and, of course, then Prime Minister. Well, yesterday, those candidates had to secure a minimum of 20 votes from fellow MPs to be able to enter this ballot today. Taking Sajid Javid, Raymond Chishti out of the running. Currently in the race, we have Rishi Sunak, as we've been discussing, Penny Mordaunt, who made her set of stall out today, Jeremy Hunt there, Liz Truss, Tom Tugendhat, Suella Braverman, Nadhim Zahawi and Kemi Badenoch. Well, with Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt having the largest backing of MPs so far, lots of number crunching. In the first ballot, contenders needing to secure at least 30 votes from MPs to stay in that race. The results being announced a little later at 5 this afternoon. Let's get the very latest. Our political editor, live for us at Westminster. Darren is there, looking at the clock, just minutes to go, of course, until those ballots open, Darren. So has there been all that last-minute frenzied horse trading going on?
Yeah, indeed, it's happening right now in Parliament. I've just come from the Palace of Westminster. As you say, voting due to begin in 8 minutes' time. It's going to take 2 hours, or MPs have got 2 hours to get the ballots in. And you're right, Mark, in suggesting that clearly MPs are trying to see where the support is going to, who potentially, if they back some of the other candidates yesterday, on the previous days, who they're going to back in this first round. Voting should have ended 3:30, then at 5 we're expecting the results to be announced. I think there is something that's really, really interesting that's going to happen here, though, which is two things. A, to get through the second ballot, you need to receive at least 30 MPs being backed, or someone will at least drop out, because even if they all get above 30, whoever is last in that overall total will be immediately eliminated for the race, with a second round due to be held tomorrow. The other really interesting thing is that in the last couple of minutes we've had a poll out from YouGov, which has been polling Conservative Party members, and it has found that Penny Mordaunt essentially is way out in the lead, with 27% of Conservative members backing her, ahead of Badenoch, who's on 15%, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss on 13%, Tom Tugendhat down in 8%. So Penny Mordaunt very much in the lead amongst Conservative Party members, and also that she would be in the lead irrespective of who she's up against. So, for example, if she was running against Liz Truss, she would win that vote amongst Conservative members by 55% to 37%. If she was up against Rishi Sunak, for example, who clearly is in the lead amongst Conservative MPs at the moment, she would win that by 67% to 28%. What I'm trying to say to you is that Penny Mordaunt appears, at least from this YouGov pretty scientific poll amongst Conservative members, is way out in the lead, and that may well weigh heavily on Conservative MPs, thinking, well, if Penny gets into the final two, it looks like at the moment she may well be the favourite to win.
Right, so what about this dichotomy then between what the MPs are thinking and what the party membership is thinking? Because I think I'm right in saying it was at one stage, as far as Westminster was concerned, Rishi Sunak versus the rest.
Indeed, and he is still substantially out in the lead when it comes to that MP's tally. But frankly, we know, for example, the vote on the right is pretty divided effectively, if you like, three ways, between Liz Truss, Kemi Badenoch and Suella Braverman. Now, clearly, if one or two of those drop out, is that potentially a boost for, let's say, Liz Truss, because she's out in the lead amongst that group at the moment? Is if Tom Tugendhat drops out of this race, because his support go to Penny Mordaunt. This is why it's so unpredictable, Mark. It's trying to work out where MPs may well break when some of those candidates start to drop out of the race. And even then, it's not necessarily guaranteed. For example, Grant Shapps yesterday came in behind Rishi Sunak. He had about a dozen MPs backing him, but they didn't all back Rishi Sunak. Some of them actually decided in the end to go for Liz Truss. But you're right, there is this different electorate, if you like, to a large degree, where MPs and the candidates at the moment are trying to appeal to those within the Conservative Parliamentary Party to try and get them down to the final two by the middle of next week, but also at the same time thinking of policy pledges and indeed, commitments that they're trying to make that may well appeal to members, because in the end it will be those members, the 160,000 Conservative members, who will decide ultimately who wins this contest and who becomes Prime Minister. And on that note also, we've got a little bit of an update today from Number 10, and that is that we are expecting a new Conservative leader to be announced on September 5th. We knew that already, but actually Boris Johnson is not expected to step down as Prime Minister until the 6th of September, so till the Tuesday, the day after that. He's going to go to the Queen, formally announce to her that he is going to remove himself as Prime Minister, and that is when whoever that new Conservative leader is, announced on Monday, September 5th, will officially take over as head of the government, as the new Prime Minister of the UK on Tuesday, September 6th.
All weekend allowed in Chequers. Who knows? Darren, for the moment, thank you for that. We'll be back to you, of course, as we get more in Westminster. Let's just get a thought from Justin here in the studio. Again, you know, you've seen plenty of these political changes. I mean, one of the things that perhaps we should reflect on is whoever becomes the new Prime Minister and the Chancellor and the government, they've probably not got an awful lot of time to get the economy back in shape, with maybe a general election coming up 18 months around the corner.
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult indeed, and considering, you know, the global economy is still growing, that's good news, but it was growing a few months ago at 4.5%. Now looking about that's 2.5%. China's got some problems, it's slowing up. America's got the same situation ourselves, and getting that economy moving. So there's only so much you can do domestically, or she can do domestically. So it means that the rest of the world has to pick up. The good news is the rest of the world has been coordinating more, so that is looking encouraging. But really what they have to do, if she can, or he or she can actually make sure that the tax system isn't resolved, no one's going to fix it in 18 months, to give people the idea that actually it's good to invest in Britain and give people the confidence to go out to spend and invest.
And allow very quickly the bank to do its job, Bank of England, in terms of walloping inflation.
Walloping inflation, because otherwise, you go back to 74, I remember seeing my father with inflation 25% on a fixed pension scheme. Wealth was being destroyed in front of him.
Yeah. Justin, for the moment, you'll stay with us, of course, and get more reaction. Nice and cool here in the studio, we have to say, at the moment. But as things are warming up in Westminster, with that voting for the leadership hopefuls now underway, definitely hotting up elsewhere, because the UK could be recording its highest ever temperature next week, perhaps up to 40 Celsius, so that's the record. Forecasters issuing an amber heat warning. What does that actually mean, though, for all those people having to work in unbearable temperatures? Safe to say, most UK workplaces probably not blessed with air conditioning or even maybe windows that open. Let's join our GB News reporter Alice Porter, out and about, speaking to businesses impacted by the hot conditions. Alice, all right for the ducks and the geese maybe, but sometimes us Brits aren't very good at keeping our cool. How are you finding things?
Hi there, good afternoon. Well, I have to say, it is a beautiful day out here in the park. It's 27 degrees Celsius. We've got the sun beaming down, geese everywhere. It's looking absolutely picturesque on the river. But that is not true for lots of people who have to work in these very difficult conditions. So much so that actually MPs were looking at legislation this week to set a maximum temperature for people to work at. And they're looking at 30 degrees Celsius or 27 degrees Celsius if you're working in oh, I've got a geese hissing at me. I might move down here. Or if you're working something like construction. And I was actually speaking on a construction site this morning, and a lot of the people there were saying that the material is getting so hot that it's really difficult to use. And I was also speaking with someone called Mo Fahim. He is the owner of a curry house in Tilehurst, and he was telling me of the difficulties of working in the conditions in the curry house, and also the impact it's had on his business with people cancelling their bookings. And this is what he had to say.
People are turning around and calling up saying, can I cancel the bookings? And then we do ask, like, why are you cancelling a booking? And then there was like, oh, the weather is too hot. With this weather, we don't really like to come out for the curry. So we just like to do like other stuff. So they don't come. They don't want to come.
And what kind of percentage have you noticed in terms of a drop in bookings?
I can say is about 30%, 35%, you know. So it's just people doesn't want to have an Indian food in this hot weather.
So that was Mo Fahim speaking to me there, owner of Spice Masters in Tilehurst. So I think it was an example there of how this is impacting businesses around the area. And I think the worry is this could be even harder for those businesses over the next few days, because the Met Office, as you were saying earlier there, they have issued an amber weather warning, which has actually been extended. So it's going to start on Saturday, continue until Tuesday. And they're expecting temperatures on Monday to reach 36 degrees Celsius. And with that weather warning in place, it does mean that there is a danger to life. So great if you can be out and about and enjoying the sunshine in the park like the ducks and the geese, but not so good if you've got a business where you have to work in those very difficult conditions.
Indeed. Alice, very quickly, one thought, of course, a lot of people are working from home. I guess their employers may be wanting to know that they are working and not just sitting in the back garden with a drink of something rather cool.
Yes, well, I have to say, I've been here in parks before on a Friday when people are working from home and it's very, very hot. And there's a lot of people taking some leisurely lunch breaks on a Friday, I have to say. But it's really difficult for people because actually, if you're working from home, it's a lot harder because you don't have the air conditioning. You're in the lovely GB News office, which has lovely air conditioning there. And it's really hard for people who are working from home. So people, if you are working from home, do take the advice and drink lots and lots of cold water.
Alice, thank you very much indeed down there. And a lovely spot by the river with, I think, a gaggle of geese, and that's the correct phrase for that. As we all struggle with the heat wave, and of course more, as Alice was saying, coming into next week, 35, 36, even 40 perhaps. You're watching On the Money with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Liam. But coming up, today's Money Talks interview, Edward Chancellor. Now, he's a financial historian, author, journalist, investment strategist, and has contributed to the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal and Money Week. Stay tuned for all of that. But first, let's get the latest GB News headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 1:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Boris Johnson has defended his record in office, saying he'll leave Downing Street with his head held high. It's the first Prime Minister's question since his resignation. Well, Mr Johnson was accused of leaving behind a broken economy. The Prime Minister said he believed his team in government had done a remarkable job in helping the country through difficult times. The first round of voting is underway for Conservative MPs to choose who they support in the leadership contest. 8 candidates are still in the running, and today they've been soliciting support. Trade Secretary Penny Mordaunt has launched her campaign, saying she would return to traditional Conservative values and fix what she called a broken Whitehall machine. Tom Tugendhat has pledged to increase defence spending. The candidates have to hit a threshold of 30 votes today to stay in the race, with the results going to be announced at 5 p.m. The UK economy grew by 0.5% in May, following a 0.2% drop in April. Analysts had expected that figure to remain flat. The ONS says the growth came after a bounce back across all services, manufacturing and construction, with a particular increase in demand for health services and holidays. The President of Sri Lanka has temporarily authorised the country's Prime Minister to carry out presidential duties. It's amid ongoing protests in the country caused by anger and inflation and widespread fuel and medicine shortages. The Premier has fled to the Maldives hours before he was due to resign. He's insisted he still intends to step down. A state of emergency and a curfew's been imposed in the aftermath of the PM's escape. Twitter is suing Elon Musk for breaking a £37 billion deal to buy the social media platform. Twitter's asking a US court to order the Tesla owner to complete the merger at the agreed share price. Last week, Musk said he was terminating the deal because Twitter failed to provide information regarding how many fake accounts were on the platform. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of the day's markets. The pound is 1.194 to the dollar and the pound is 1.185 to the euro. The price of gold currently stands at £1,449.16 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for real-time investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Very warm welcome back. You're watching On the Money with me, Mark Longhurst, today sitting in for Liam. Now, as private transport has been coming under the spotlight, Uber whistleblower exposing alleged corruption in the cab-sharing company system as it was introduced across the world. The focus has been very much on public transport. But it's safe to say even that, without its problems at the moment, from cuts to local bus services after that hit to passenger and indeed staffing numbers with the pandemic, to the threat of continuing industrial action. In Yorkshire, for instance, Arriva drivers rejecting their latest new pay offer today. So it's a challenging time for the industry. So how does it view the UK's goal of net zero emissions, including public transport, of course? Well, a report released today from the Confederation of Passenger Transport suggesting that our shift from journeys from cars to buses and coaches could be a key driver, if you pardon the expression, towards helping us reach those targets. But given the current challenges, is that even feasible? Let's hear from Graham Vidler, who is the Chief Executive Officer at the Confederation of Passenger Transport, and Justin too with us still in the studio. Graham, first, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Given the pressures, as we were saying, about the fact that passengers stayed at home and, of course, no one was spending money, and indeed government funding, I think, to the industry to help them over that is due to come to an end in October. How is the situation economically for you all?
Thank you, Mark. Yes, as you quite rightly point out, lots of headwinds facing the industry, as facing many sectors in the UK economy at the moment. But what the report we published today shows, I think, is how much potential and how much need there is for growth in bus and coach travel over the remainder of the decade. So in order for the nation to stay on track for our net zero targets, we need collectively to switch some car journeys to bus and coach. On average, it works out at just one per driver per month over the rest of this decade. But you translate that into a growth in demand for bus travel, and what you've got is a 40% growth potential for bus travel by the end of this decade. So managing those headwinds we face now is really, really important for us to be able to capitalise on that potential and support the nation in its decarbonisation ambitions.
But what about the structural problems? Many of us are used to, in city centres, seeing buses running on gas, even some with hydrogen and perhaps electric hybrids and so on. Go out into the countryside and they're still having to run old buses belching out diesel fumes.
Well, any bus is more environmentally friendly than the alternative of travelling by car. That's a simple function of the number of people that you can get onto a bus. But in addition to that, the industry has invested billions in the last few years in converting to hybrid and zero-emission vehicles. It has, as you know, gone very much faster in urban conditions, where it's easier to get the range right, but it will also follow in time across the country. And the industry is absolutely committed to making the transition to a fully zero-emission fleet over the next decade or so.
And what about government help, not just central government, of course, but local authorities as well? We're likely to get this new government. What do you want from them, especially in terms of like a joined-up transport system, which many critics say we still haven't got?
Yeah, that's really, really important. So our current government started the process off with a thing called the National Bus Strategy, which they announced earlier this year, and which they are funding local authorities, several local authorities across the country, to work with operators on really transforming bus services and taking them to the next level. We need the next government to continue that momentum, to complete the National Bus Strategy and to make sure that passengers, wherever they are in the country, can benefit from improvements in faster journey times, cheaper, more simple fares, and more frequent buses going where they need to go.
But can you make it cheaper? Because one of the problems, of course, about green levies and buying new electric buses, it's expensive. You've got to make that back in your fares.
The key, Mark, is to tap into the virtuous cycle. So if we can get more people travelling on buses, and if we can speed buses up through some of the bus priority measures that will be put in place through that National Bus Strategy, then we're getting both more revenue and we're reducing our cost base. That enables us to reduce fares and or put on more services, which in turn will attract yet more customers, reduce congestion more, and speed up bus journeys again.
Yeah.
It's really about cracking into that virtuous cycle.
Well, Graham, we've still got Justin here in the studio. This is a nasty question for you, but have you been on a bus recently?
No, I use a bus an awful lot.
Really?
Well, in London, it's not worth having a car.
Exactly.
I have got an old, well, I've actually got a Morris Minor Traveller, 1963, so that's fine. It doesn't actually go very fast anyway. But that's not the point. We've got public transport in London has now got considerably better. It's had a lot of investment. So the technology, so I know when buses are turning up, so I don't have to sit there queuing under a wet bus shelter for hours for a bus to turn up. I know when it's turning up. The system has made it easy for me. And so actually that's making it a much more pleasurable event.
Right, because we think of them being sort of rather old-fashioned, but they are actually very important for having an efficient transport infrastructure.
Yep, you have that, and it's whether people are going to be working at home or not. But the ability to be able to adjust and change is necessary. So the technology, I know when buses are coming and going. I've also got USB outlets in there, so I can plug in and work whilst I'm on the bus as well. And so make it a much more pleasurable and easier existence rather than the rather desperate time I'm going to catch the bus. So really, now you can actually make it more fun.
Standing by a wet bus stop,
Yes, exactly.
Graham, is that one of the challenges? I don't know what to say. Do you have to make buses sexy again?
I think Justin's absolutely right to point out the mismatch between people's expectations of buses and their actual experience. And it's not just London. I live in York and I often use the buses with my young children who are pretty demanding customers. But they'll get on the bus and they'll say, look, free Wi-Fi, I can charge my phone, the things that matter most to them. And by the way, it's a zero-emission vehicle, Dad, so, it's doing wonders for the environment. We need to provide that excellence of service all across the country, and we need to encourage people to use it because, as Justin was saying, I think people's perceptions of bus travel lag behind the reality a little bit.
Yeah, but great fun, of course, if you get upstairs and you get that great view of a double-decker. Graham, thanks very much indeed for bringing us all the latest on that, and of course we'll see how your report gets received. Thanks for joining us. Well, it's time now on The Money for our daily interview series, Money Talks. And Liam's spoken to Edward Chancellor, now a very well-known financial historian, author, journalist and investment strategist, no less. Well, his new book, The Price of Time, is the real story of interest. It's an account of the impact of central bank policies, ultra-low interest rates, quantitative easing since that 2008 global financial crisis. His previous books include Devil Take the Hindmost, a history of financial speculation, translated into many languages indeed, and the New York Times Book of the Year. Well, after reading history at Cambridge and Oxford, no less, he worked for Lazard Brothers and since contributed to numerous publications, including the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal and Money Week. Now, The Price of Time is highly critical of global central banks, whose policies, he argues, have unleashed all this inflation and brought the world to the brink of another financial crisis. Here's financial historian Edward Chancellor, our latest guest on Money Talks.
Edward, great to see you here on The Money. Thanks a lot for joining us. It strikes me that the main thrust of your book is that whenever we have particularly low interest rates for an extended period of time, we end up with lots of financial turmoil. Well, interest rates have been very low for an extended period of time.
Well, that is part of the main thrust of the book. And I cite the great Victorian financial journalist Walter Bagehot, who made this comment that John Bull can stand many things, but he cannot stand 2%. And what Bagehot means by that is that when interest rates go down to 2%, people need a bit more money, so they start speculating, they start doing impossible things. So what we see from the 19th century, and I thought actually you can trace it back even earlier than that, is that the periods of easy money are associated with the build-ups of great speculation and then financial crises.
Many people will recognise what you just said and relate to it. You know, pensioners saving and getting what we call negative real interest rates. When the interest rate is less than the rate of inflation, you're losing money in real terms on your savings. And by God, the interest rate's lower than the rate of inflation at the moment.
As you know, interest in recent years has been lower than in 5 millennia of history. The advent of negative interest, a sort of tax on savings, has never been seen before. And savings, interest is, after all, an inducement to save, but also a return on your savings. So the era of negative and very low real interest rates has actually damaged pensioners and savers tremendously.
It is a personal pleasure for me that you've written this book, The Price of Time, The Real Story of Interest, because I have, as you know, my column's been banging on since the 2008-9 financial crisis about the dangers of ultra-low interest rates, about the dangers of so-called quantitative easing, this massive expansion of central bank balance sheets. It strikes me, Edward Chancellor, and I wonder if you agree, that in the aftermath of that financial crisis in 2008, when it looked as if a lot of the world's banking system was about to collapse, ATMs were about to stop working, that would have led to civic unrest, riots, proper breakdown of society in some parts of the world. It strikes me at that time emergency measures were justifiable. Quantitative easing, the expansion of central bank balance sheets, ultra-low interest rates were justifiable. But then what was meant to be emergency medicine became like a kind of lifestyle choice.
Where was the drug? And we took the drug for 12, 13 years. And the more we took it, the more we liked it. And you saw that with the great money printing during the COVID lockdowns, with massive growth in the money supply and lower interest rates than ever.
So the logic of your position, Edward, and I say again, you are a journalist, a financial analyst of extremely high repute. So the logic of your position is sell all your shares if you've got any, and if you're a person under 30 waiting to buy a house because it's unaffordable, wait a bit more and soon they'll be cheaper. Is that what you're saying?
Well, you're putting some words into my mouth. There are some markets where, we won't go into the details, but some parts of the world where equity markets are reasonably cheap. I'd say, Japan, for instance. Parts of Europe, but that Europe has its own problems, parts of the emerging market. So I wouldn't say get rid of all your equities. In fact, again, as you know, equities over the long run provide an inflation hedge. They just tend to take a bit of a down hit during inflation.
It's all about time in the market rather than timing the market, right?
Yes, but I would go back to your second point about housing. Yeah, I'd say to my nephews and nieces who have been priced out of the London housing market for the last 12 years and getting extremely irritated about it, to bide their time, because I think that prices probably will come down to the sort of level they were when we left university, and it was reasonable to expect that if you worked hard you might be able to afford a flat.
We're unusual, aren't we, among financial journalists, you and I, among columnists, because we have been focused on these issues over the last 10 to 15 years or so, the dangers of lower interest rates, the dangers of quantitative easing. Do you think our so-called profession, it's more of a trade, isn't it, journalism, even financial journalism, do you think we've been guilty of complacency? Have we not held the central banks to account enough? Have we been too mesmerised by the money printing, the rising financial markets, the kind of hoopla of the age that we've lived in up until now?
I wouldn't necessarily blame the financial journalists alone. I think you have to say, to my mind, the problem lies with the economists, both the academic economists and the central bank economists themselves. They know nothing. One of the reasons I wrote this history of interest is it became pretty clear to me that the central bankers and the economists know nothing about interest. They've forgotten the function of interest, the deep and rich history of interest, and the vital functions that interest serves in a capitalist economy. I say in the book that capitalism without interest cannot function. It is, so to speak, the keystone that holds the system together. So yes, I think a lot of journalists don't really understand it. They tended to sort of take their lead from what the central bankers say. You know, in America, if you can get the job of being the Fed watcher on the Wall Street Journal, that's a pretty cushy number because you just basically.
But don't say anything that annoys the Fed. Don't say anything that annoys the Bank of England. I've been in journalism a long time, and I would say that journalists have been far too mesmerised by the central bankers. They have been far too slow to deploy the kind of analytical skills that you've deployed in writing this book and making the statements you're now stating.
Yeah, so the central bankers were probably given a free ride. You know, I think one of the reasons they were given a free ride is, first of all, as you say, they sort of patched everything up after the financial crisis. Do you remember Ben Bernanke, then chairman of the Federal Reserve, was made the Time magazine Person of the Year in 2009. Never mind the fact that he was largely the person responsible for the financial crisis. So people only looked at the way they'd patched things up. The other thing that I think people are beginning to understand more now is that the sort of inflation of asset prices following the low interest rates and the quantitative easing and so forth, that made a lot of people who owned houses, who owned stocks, particularly happy. I mean, what's not to like if your house is going up 10% a year and your equity portfolio is going up 15% a year? You're going to think the central banks have done a good job. The trouble is that when the system then all starts falling to pieces, you get inflation, rising interest rates, and the asset prices come down. You say, actually, hang on a sec, I wasn't as rich as I thought I was. In fact, not only was I not as rich, but I haven't saved as much as I should have saved. And then you actually then have some new problems, which is, hang on a sec, perhaps I can't afford to retire now, given that I'm not as rich. So I think when you get to that point, then everyone turns around and say, hang on a sec, these central bankers are sort of not what they profess to be.
Well, it's a very wide-ranging book. You've stuck your neck out and you've criticised the monetary authorities, Edward Chancellor, and I must say, I'm fully behind you when you do that, and it's been really interesting to talk to you. Thanks for joining me on Money Talks.
Thanks.
Liam there talking with Edward Chancellor, financial historian, author, journalist, investment strategist, saying central banks forgotten about interest. Well, I think we found it quite interesting, didn't we? And don't forget, you can listen to the full 25-minute version of their interview and dozens of other extended Money Talk interviews now on our Money Talks podcast. That's on the GB News YouTube channel, or, of course, via the GB News app on your phone. Now, lots of you been emailing, which we're always very glad to have. Let's see what Mike's had to say to us. The Downing Street cat would do a better job than the bunch that have applied for it. Someone help us all. I think that might well be referring to the Tory party leader hopefuls. Egon, meanwhile, is saying the inflation figures are wrong. Inflation is much higher than stated. Trying to suggest things are good with a 0.5% GDP increase is frankly fraudulent, he says. Michael thinks, however, I have to say that for me, Penny Mordaunt, head and shoulders above all other contenders. The rest are simply not up to the leadership part of the job of PM. She is the best woman candidate, and frankly, the men provide no competition. Keep the emails coming. Tell us what you think, particularly, of course, as the party votes on their next leader. We'll have the latest for you throughout the afternoon with Darren. Well, that's all that we've got time for today, but I'm back with you to join us at 1 p.m. tomorrow for more business, economics and consumer news. It's been a pleasure to be with you. This is On the Money.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's turned into another fine day for many, with warm sunshine across large parts of the country and dry for most, but not for all. There are some showers coming along for Scotland and Northern Ireland. With low pressure to the far north, we are seeing some influence from that, but high pressure remains close to the south and the west of the country. And as a result, well, plenty of sunshine to come for England and Wales. Clear spells overnight and some clear spells for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but further showers coming into western and northern Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland as well, particularly towards the northwest. Overnight, it will remain relatively mild, 12 in Glasgow and Belfast, 12 in Cardiff, 15 in London there. So warm as we start off Thursday, but not oppressive overnight, I think. And a bright start for many, with plenty of sunshine for England and Wales. A few more showers, though, will appear during the morning and into the afternoon, notably for parts of northern England, especially the Pennines, and more widespread across Scotland and Northern Ireland.